Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to say the warmest welcome to all the participants who are joining us from Zoom. And here joining us also all the distinguished panelists and speakers. We are very honored to have you all in this special event. First, Ms. Marlistia Citraningrum from Institute for Essential Services Reform, Mr. Adam Adiwinata from International Renewable Energy Agency or IRENA, Ms. Sonal Agarwal from Ernst & Young, Mr. Lawrence Eng from Climate Smart Venture, Mr. Jihan Ahmad Asyabani from Yayasan Rumah Energi, and last but not least, Ms. Erwida Maulia from Nikkei Asia. My name is Nashai, and I will be the master of ceremony for today's event, webinar Unlocking Potential Renewable Energy Finance in Southeast Asia. This seminar will provide a platform for discussion among the energy and finance experts about the potential of renewable energy finance in Southeast Asia. Before starting our event for today, I would like to recite some rules so today's agenda will run smoothly. First, we will conduct this event in English, but we provide translation services to Bahasa Indonesia. To activate this feature, please click on the interpretation menu that's available in the bottom right corner of your application. Second, please rename your Zoom account the following format: name _ organization or institution, for example, Nashai _ IESR. Third, during the webinar, all the microphones will be disabled. So if you would like to ask a question to one of the speakers during the webinar, please write down your question in the chat box and to whom your question is addressed. Or during the discussion, please use the raise hands feature and follow the moderator leads. Okay, without further ado, let's begin with the first session of the event, the opening remarks for today's webinar by Ms. Marlistia Citraningrum from Institute for Essential Services Reform. Ms. Citra, the time is yours.
All right, thank you, Nashai, and hello, distinguished participants and also resource person. Thank you for joining us today in the webinar of Unlocking Potential of Renewable Energy Finance in Southeast Asia. I'm very glad we're taking on this very important issue to promote acceleration of energy transition in the region. So as far as we know, Southeast Asia is a region with a very rapid economic growth, and we have been bouncing back very strongly since the pandemic. And based on latest IMF estimation, our regional GDP is expected to grow by 6.2% until 2027. So it is a very good news, and we hope that we can continue to grow as a region and also as individual countries. But we also need to understand that we experience a fast population rise, which means that more resources are needed, and that includes energy. With climate crisis threatening our world, Southeast Asia is also of high vulnerability to its impacts, be that forest fires, drought, flood, and also rising sea levels. And of course, we need to rethink the development and economic growth as green growth and sustainable development. So the wave of energy transition has hit our region as well, but with different paces among the countries. And ASEAN member states have also declared their net zero targets with different years. Indonesia, for example, set the net zero target as 2060 or sooner. Other countries set the 2050 as their cap year for the net zero emission target. So it is also important to observe how energy transition is going in Southeast Asia, how far is the progress right now, because based on observation and analysis conducted by Fair Finance Asia, coal financing is still big in Asia and especially in Southeast Asian countries. Since Paris Agreement is signed, there is still almost $700 billion in loans and underwriting services that have been channeled to companies active in coal mining and also coal-fired power operation. And that means that more growth in renewable energy or energy transition is a bit stalled, because accelerating energy transition in Southeast Asia will require almost $1 trillion up to 2030, based on IRENA estimates for 5.5 degree scenario. Our colleague from IRENA will explain more about that. And 40% of that will need to go to power generation alone, because we are still relies heavily on fossil fuels, coal especially. And we also need to highlight the sad fact of Southeast Asia that IEA reported in 2023, that average annual capital expenditure in ASEAN for solar PV and wind only amounted to around $10 billion over the past 5 years, which is very small, and it is among the second lowest in the world for the investment on that type of renewable energy. And another sad truth is that was almost mostly mobilized in one country, Vietnam, and not other ASEAN countries. So we think that this kind of forum and discussion is very important to increase the attractiveness of Southeast Asia in renewable energy investment. And we need to understand the why our region has yet to promote more investment in renewable energy and energy transition, because our growth in the region for renewable energy is still inconsistent, different policy framework and implementation in different countries. People call it that sometimes in Asia it's not actually an energy transition, but still energy addition, because there's still a lot of coal coming up in the Southeast Asia, and the renewables still take very small part compared to other type of energy resources. And also because public funding is still dominant in Southeast Asia for renewable energy. So we need to think of good investment framework to attract more commercial and financial investment. I hope that our speakers today will talk about exactly how the landscape of renewable energy investment in Southeast Asia, what makes us stuck at this point. Also the opportunities to mobilize more investment and of course innovative financing schemes, so that we can finally catch up with other regions and to have more accelerated pace of energy transition. I hope that the discussion today will give more insight on how we as a region can move forward for accelerated energy transition, and I hope you all enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chitra, for your welcoming remarks. Next, we are going to begin our main session for today, which will be moderated by Ms. Erwida Maulia from Nikkei Asia. Ms. Erwida is Chief Jakarta Correspondent for Nikkei Asia. She writes diverse topics on Indonesian politics, economy, and business news, with a particular interest in energy transition and infrastructure development. Ms. Erwida has been covering Indonesia for 16 years, and she has won the ASEAN Media Awards and a Sabeo Best in Business Award for her COVID-19 related reporting. Quite a remarkable background of you, Ms. Erwida. Okay, Ms. Erwida, the time is yours.
So thank you, Nashai, for the nice introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to meet you. I'm Erwida, Chief Correspondent for Nikkei Asia in Jakarta. So thank you for joining us today in this webinar that will discuss a very important topic on unlocking potentials for renewable energy financing in Southeast Asia. As Marlistia just explained in her keynote speech, it's a very tricky situation. There are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities. So we have 4 panelists with us today who will discuss this very interesting and important topic, and who will hopefully be able to share their valuable insights based on their experience in the related issue. So we have here Mas Adam Adiwinata from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and we have Lawrence Ang from Climate Smart Ventures, CSV. We have Sonal Agarwal from EY. And last but not least, we have Mas Jihan Ahmad Asyabani from Yayasan Rumah Energi. So each panelist will have 15 minutes to deliver their presentation. After that, we'll have 45 minutes for a Q&A session. So perhaps we can start now with Mas Adam. Mas Adam has over 30 years of experience working in the energy efficiency and renewable energy sector with various international organizations. He is now working with IRENA Innovation and Technology Center, developing the energy transition outlook for ASEAN, among other things. So, Mas Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to also thank the organizer to invite me to today's webinar with regards to the unlocking potential of renewable and energy finance in Southeast Asia. My name is Adam Adi Winata. I'm the consultant for the energy transition outlook for IRENA. I've been in the agency now for over 3 years now. And I would like to share what are the key findings that IRENA has been seeing, especially in the ASEAN region, in how to meeting the net zero and sustainable energy financing needs in the ASEAN region. Ladies and gentlemen, as highlighted by Mbak Chitra, that climate risk is getting more real as days pass, and this is also hit our regions. And our regions now is in the, we can say it is in the crossroad, whether to still continue to our path, which is like very heavily fossil fuel dependent, and risking our regions and the ASEAN member states countries to the price volatilities and dependencies to other to resources from the other countries, or we can start as early as possible, as soon as possible, to utilize the abundance resources of the renewables that we have. But there is a good news that more countries here in ASEAN regions, that they are getting more committed to reach the decarbonization and even reaching net zero by around half these centuries, or even in not so far after the half centuries. And yes, this decarbonization needs to happen really fast, with coal power substitution becoming the first priority that the region needs to pay attention to. There's a political momentum to move in these directions, and also within the countries, and of course in the regions, that highlight the remarkable turnaround from the development in recent years. While there is importance of the energy transitions, the government still concerned about the economic growth and jobs. That highlights that the just and equitable energy transition is really needed. Yeah. So to put in the ASEAN context, maybe you can go a couple more click, Mbak Nashai. It's supposed to be. Right, so let's go back maybe a little bit. One slide before. Ooh, there's supposed to be a writing over there, but it's okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so IRENA has published the World Energy Transition Outlook in 2022, and soon we will publish the 2023 versions. And 1.5 degree C pathways conclude that renewable energies, energy efficiency, and electrifications are the 3 components of decarbonizations. The 3 pillars needs to be supplemented with the hydrogens, CCS, mainly for the certain hard to abate sectors such as industries. To make that happen, the global society needs to halve their fossil fuel by 2030 and increase the share of electricity to 30% by 2030. And translating these global findings on the net zero pathway into the regional energy transitions outlooks, we also produced the renewable outlook for ASEAN towards a regional energy transition report that was released last September during the ASEAN Ministerial Energy Meeting. And on top of that, we also published 2 deep dive country energy transition outlook for Indonesia and Malaysia. This work was supported by the government of Denmark and conducted closely with the ASEAN Center for Energies as well as the national stakeholders. in which the work highlighted how ASEAN as the region, as well as Indonesia and Malaysia as the member state, can act towards the carbonized energy future in reaching the net zero level target. Today, I will provide you a review about the ASEAN region, focus on the investment opportunities and the short-term investment towards the 2030. The energy policy needs affordable, reliable, and environmentally acceptable solutions. It's also widely acknowledged that economic growth and job creations are important aspects when we are talking about the energy transitions. So climate is one driver, but also the local operations, energy security, costs, and job creations. ASEAN is a home for 12% of the global coal-fired plant capacity. To put that into the context, and the countries such as Indonesia, Philippines, and even Vietnam, they have still, until this moment, a high coal generation share. But the energy policy objective have been changing fast. Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam are signatories to the Global Coal Clean Power Transition Agreement that aims to end the coal utilizations in the power sectors. But such change will not going to happen overnight. The electricity generation over capacity problem in Indonesia and the problem for stranded assets still being the concern of these activities. And the early coal retirement initiative under the leadership of ASEAN Development Bank is one of the example program aiming to tackle this problem. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the findings from the ASEAN Renewable Outlook. So when we take a closer look on the ASEAN findings from our studies, we have assessed that in planned energy scenarios, which is the currently placed policies by the ASEAN member states, that the final energy consumptions is going to grow about 2.5. And the 1.5 degree C scenarios, which is the compatible scenarios with the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree C climate target, the demand will reduce about a quarter of the planned energy scenarios due to the more use of renewables and higher efficiency rates and also electrifications. In the absolute terms, electricity demands will grow fivefold between now to 2050. So anything related to electricity supply will pose a significant investment for the regions to look after. The structure of power supply needs to change dramatically with renewable energy power share needs to double by 2030. And in form of the capacity, it will need to go from 29% to 58%. IRENA analysis shows that the renewable have become the cheapest form of electricity generations, and RE share will continue to grow rapidly in any scenarios, even within the planned energy scenarios. But we find out that this is still not enough, and we need to accelerate even more the transition towards renewables if we are to achieve the climate target by the mid-centuries. Next slide, please. Okay, with regards to the decarbonizations of the power sectors, this is the priority that the ASEAN region needs to pay attention to. I said that phasing out coal power is a top priority. Around 12% of today's global coal power generation capacity are located in ASEAN, and Indonesia is the world's largest coal exporting nation. A shift towards renewable power is a cornerstone of the energy transitions. Some ASEAN countries have already had a very high renewable energy power shares, but this is due to the deployment of hydropower. In 2021, the renewable accounted for the 25% of the power generations, with the less than 3% of this are solar and wind, as highlighted by Mbak Citra in the opening remarks. The solar PV and wind must account for a majority of the renewable share growth in the decarbonized future for the Southeast Asia regions. For such pathways, in absolute terms, the need of installation of 240 gigawatt of solar PV are needed towards the 2030, both utility scale and rooftop, and another 30 gigawatts of wind needs to be added into the system. The capacity then needs to increase up to tenfold from the 2030 to 2050s to ensure that the regions reaching towards the RE at least 90% of renewable penetration in the energy mix. And this also needs to be accompanied with the increase of installed capacity on the geothermal, hydropower generations, as well as biomass. Next slide, please. Okay, so with regards to the investment opportunities and in ASEAN, Chitra also highlighted that IRENA's finding that by 2030 alone, the investment of nearly $1 trillion is needed to transform the region's energy sectors. And this 800 billion US dollars, if we are talking only the investment needed to purely renewables and the other energy transitions measure without considering about the other fossil fuel investments that are still going to be happening towards 2030. So this shows the high importance of the investment on the renewables and the other supplementary energy transitions until 2030, that 80% of them needs to be mobilized towards the energy transitions, specifically investment in the power sectors and the energy sectors in overall. But however, these high energy transition investments are going to be balanced by substantial fuel cost savings, as well as the reductions avoided costs from the externalities such as climate change and health. Can you help with the presentation slide, please? Yeah, within this, for ASEAN, about a third of the investment to 2030 are going to be needed. A slide before this, please. Excuse me, Manasai. Can you go back one slide before? Okay, yeah. So for the ASEAN regions, I would like to highlight that about 1/3 of the investment towards 2030 alone are needed to be mobilized towards the power generations, with grid and flexibility as well as energy efficiency are reaching in the order of the 200 billions of the total investments. This translated to about 156 billion of investment of solar PVs, hydropower generation requiring about 50 billions, as well as the geothermal about 20 billions. Significant reinforcement and expansion of the grid is needed, with that is requiring about 173 billions of investment towards 2030. On the top of that, the EV sales also in the regions need to grow to about 13 million cars that needed about 47 billions invested to the provision of the charging infrastructure around the regions. Next slide, please. We also perform a detailed analysis of the international transmission line that our global world energy transition outlooks also have the themes that to support to enable the energy transitions, the infrastructure and transmission are really needed. It's imperative to be conducted. So I talked with also DG Electricity today that they said like no transmissions, no transformations of power sectors, and this is true. That we see the needs of about 150 gigawatt international transmissions capacity within the ASEAN out to 2050. That is equivalent to 10 to 15 world scale transmission lines, or about the size of China, to put that in the context. Internal west to east transmission capacity in that place today. Better integrations of the grid creates important additional flexibility that allows better integration of the higher variable renewable share, and it also allows countries with the less resources of renewables to tap into the potential of renewables electricity. This infrastructure also enable imperative to enable the bringing the renewable electricity towards the demand where the demand is in the regions. Next slide, please. Talking about the transport sector electrifications, bioenergy as well as the hydrogens. The transport sector will see higher investment needs that including the about 14 billion US dollars annually to for the provision of electric charging, and several actions can be done to decarbonize the transport sector, such as increased efforts in finance investment in electromobilities, deploy smart charging solutions, and design tariff frameworks that works on the regional functionalities, as well as enabling business models and accommodating regulation for EV charging in the regions. The bioenergy is used mostly in the form of liquid biofuel to decarbonize the heavy-duty transport sector, and also the modern biomass in the industrial sectors. The low policy incentives and the higher cost of converting some biomass into energy carrier, such as biofuel, and the need for sustainability assurance for biomass are among the identified barrier for the development of bioenergies. So this is also the things that we can discuss further on how to tackle these issues. And green hydrogen will also have a role towards the 2050, largely supporting the decarbonizations of the hard to abate sectors such as industry. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, the solar PV is the key in the power sectors, regardless the scenarios with the capacity addition towards 2050 ranging between 100 gigawatts in planetary scenarios to as high as almost 250 gigawatt in 1/2 degree C scenarios. In the short term, investment towards 2030 reaching more than 150 billion US dollars. Solar PV installation reaching between 2.1 to 2.4 terawatt hours by 2050 in the 90% to 100% renewable features respectively. And this translates to the investment requirement of about between 1.1 trillion to 1.2 trillion of US dollars until the 2050. The ASEAN countries are home for some critical materials needed for the energy transition technologies, such as manufacturing of battery and PV modules, with Indonesia and Philippines alone covers nearly 80% of the world's nickel productions. And this means that the ASEAN region will benefit from the economic gains, technology transfer, whilst reducing the dependency towards the non-indigenous fossil resources that grow scarce and more expensive in the regions. I know my time is about to end, but I have one more slide. Next slide, please. So this is going to be the conclusion slide from my side. So in conclusion, that the ASEAN region will need to see over the next decades the total final energy, tripling total final energy consumptions and increasing the energy demand, electricity demand about 5 times. But there are more sustainable energy transition pathways that are technology viable and economically attractive based on our finding from our studies. And yeah, substantial investment are needed, unfortunately, to reach this transform decarbonized future. But again, mainly towards decarbonizing the power generations, grid flexibility investment, electrifications, and energy efficiencies. But then, yeah, these investments, these huge investments are going to be beneficial when we are talking about the total energy cost savings that we are going to have when we are choosing the transform decarbonized energy futures compared to the current fossil fuel heavy energy sectors that we are still having. So with that, I conclude my presentations and looking forward for the panel discussions later on. Over to you, moderator, Mbak Ervina.
Okay, thank you very much, Mas Adam. That was a very interesting presentation. Let's discuss in depth during the Q&A session. Now let's move on to Sonal. Sonal is an associate partner in the strategy and transactions practice at EY. She is based in Singapore and advises clients across Southeast Asia on renewable energy and energy transition. Sonal, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you, IASR, for inviting me here to discuss on this very important topic. I believe we are all lucky and unlucky in ways to be living in this exciting time where, one, we are facing a global crisis on climate change, but at the same time, our jobs are making impact and we all are working toward this common goal of making things better. So it depends on what angle you look at. We are either lucky or very unlucky. And just as a quick intro to me, so in my role as associate partner at EY Singapore Strategy and Transactions Practice, I look after renewable energy in Southeast Asia. So my work entails across governments and policymakers, large utilities, small developers, capital providers like funds, DFIs, banks, etc., into deployment of clean energy in Southeast Asia. So with that, I would like to open this slide where EY publishes what we call as RECI, the Renewable Energy Country Attractiveness Index. It's a biannual publication where we rank 40 markets globally in terms of their attractiveness as renewable energy investment destination. Why I'm using this is to show that of all Southeast Asian markets, there are only 3 that make up to the top 40 globally. What does this mean? This means we have made progress, but maybe not enough, that we only have 3 of these markets featuring in the top 40. Now, as we go along with the presentation, I'll explore why that's the reason, what's blocking us, why do not we fare more attractively on this, extensive methodology of things. Why do not we get so much investor interest, or do we have the investor interest, but we do not have the projects? So I'll answer that as we go along. So how I'm answering, this is a bit of it is my view based on my previous work. So today, it's a combination of that, plus this current study that EY is undertaking, which is funded by a philanthropy. And we are mandated to undertake a market assessment of 9 geographies to understand what are the barriers to financing renewable energy projects in this these markets. Now, this pertains to only utility scale projects, so I'll limit the discussion to solar and wind energy projects. And of these 9 markets, 5 of them are the main Southeast Asian market where renewable energy is a big topic at the moment. The way we've gone about this study is we have interviewed ecosystem of stakeholders who operate in the renewable energy sector, including some of my friends who are on the call from Climate Smart Ventures. But we have interviewed banks, commercial lenders, investors. We have gone to small developers, large developers. We've gone to industry associations. We have gone to government organizations, etc., to understand their view on, what's blocking the flow of finance towards clean energy project in the region. Now, this is my last slide, but this is a very big slide. And I'll use this to talk about, what the landscape is. And I'll give you the answer first to my study. Is there enough capital available to finance gigawatts and gigawatts that are required for the energy transition, which Adam showed earlier? Probably the answer is yes. There is enough finance focusing on this region to support energy transition. So you see various announcements of infrastructure funds, climate focus funds, energy transition funds, et cetera, by private equity, by DFIs, and other investors. Also, the limited partners, LPs who are now becoming investors, the pension funds who are directly investing into this area, etc. So there's huge amount of capital that's focused on this subject globally and also on Asia as a whole. Now, the second question is, are we able to tap on that capital as this region? Probably no. For some markets, we are unable to tap on that capital. Now, why? Why are the barriers? What are those barriers that are blocking us from getting this capital flow? Now, one point I would like to make is capital always flows in the direction of opportunity. So some markets have shown us that. For example, Vietnam, right? When Vietnam came out with its policy and its PPA on renewable energy projects, there was a level of criticism on why this might not work because of the PPA that was not up to international benchmark, the risk it exposed the investors to, etc. Given that, the market still boomed. There was enough capital that went in. And friends at IESR were telling us earlier, 10 billion was committed to this region, most of which went to Vietnam. So the capital did flow in the direction of opportunity, despite the limitations. What did the market do about the limitations? The market priced that risk, those limitations, whether they were in the contractual structure, whether they were in the governing law, whether they were in the risk of tariff being too high, etc. But the market was able to price that risk. Now, I'm not saying that issues did not happen post the boom. There was curtailment, there were other concerns that the investor raised on the way projects performed or were able to deliver on time or not, etc. But I think that's how any sector evolves. It's not unique to renewables. It's not unique to us as this part of the world. It is for every sector of how we learn and we grow. So again, coming back, whether we have sufficient capital focusing on us, yes, we have. What can be done to unlock this capital to flow to projects? We need to have more projects. Now, my discussion with a lot of lenders was, okay, how many projects do you turn down when they reach you for financing? I think everybody said we hardly turn down any project. Yes, we do prioritize some over others. It might have to do with, their existing banking relationships. It might have to do with the size of the project. It might have to do when can they deploy the capital in those projects, etc., etc. But do they really turn down thinking this is a renewable energy project, we're not going to work on it? No. They work hard to structure the project in a way that they can make the financing work. So they might ask for sponsor support. They might ask for some guarantees, etc. Because if the project is exposed to certain risk. So as lenders, it is their prerogative to ask for such support, etc. But they do try to make the project work, the financing work. They hardly turn down. Now, the challenge they say is how many projects reaches their desks. Very few. in Southeast Asia. Now, why are very few projects reaching the financing stage? What is blocking that? So we go even a step behind that. So what's highlighted as part of the study so far, which is still underway, is that there are some common themes across the region that kind of block development of projects. Plus, if unlocked, if solved, will become the enablers for this finance flow. What are those? Okay, we need national ambition and target, which Adam highlighted. Yes, we have net zero policies, we have ambition, we have targets, right? So we are there. We have shown that we want to do it. Do we have adaptive renewable energy policies? Maybe in some markets, maybe not in the other markets. Now, some markets have demonstrated that having such policy can help them achieve better cost of renewables. For example, certainty of auctions in Malaysia and the way they were run, you could see a 50% decrease in the tariffs that were offered between LSS1 and LSS3 auctions. And similarly, other markets have shown that Vietnam was first paying 9.35, then they paid 7.09. Now the ceiling tariff is much lower, etc. Of course, the developers will also always complain about it not being enough, but are projects still happening? Probably they are. They are being optimized. They are being structured like that. So an adaptive renewable energy policy will really help you achieve lower costs and probably more certainty in minds of lenders and capital providers and grow the market. A favorable supply and demand. Of course, we only build projects when we have a demand. If you build projects without demand, there might be curtailment, etc. Right? For some markets where we have extremely high reserve margins and already overbuilt up capacity from fossil fuel, we'll probably need to work towards building a business case for renewables by shutting down those excessive overbuilt capacity from fossil fuel generation, which is what we are seeing, right? The international support is coming in form of JETP to help retire those coal-fired power projects and create an optimal supply demand and a business case for renewables really in those markets. We need thorough resource assessments. We need to make this resource assessment cheaper to do. So some developers have highlighted to us that putting up masts and the ones that are required very high masts is expensive. How can we provide capital at that stage where small developers who are in way leading the transition and developing these small scale projects in this region get that kind of funding to put the masts up? So is there any entity that can provide development financing and capital in form of the development stage? So there are some entities we know of CSEP, we know of Infraco, etc., who work in emerging and frontier markets to make these things happen. Can we enable that a little bit more? Is a question for the market to answer, right? We need transmission. So like Adam highlighted, it cannot, the solar PV, etc., cannot go without transmission, investment in transmission. We need an offtake infrastructure, which needs to be in place. Some markets have borne the brunt of it. For example, Vietnam highly talked about curtailment issues. Maybe some in Philippines also talk about it, that how transmission infrastructure for transmission is needed sooner than later to make sure that the projects that are being auctioned out, that are being built, do not suffer eventually and do not leave a bad case study for the market and not make the future investors, more wary of investment in those markets. So that's needed. We need supporting market frameworks. So most of Asia is monolithic utilities. We have one off-taker. Can we enable ways where we can have other off-takers? Can we have corporate PPAs? Some markets are working on it. We have now CGPP being piloted in Malaysia. We have DPPA being piloted in Vietnam, etc. How can we ramp up such kind of development where, we can have a bilateral contract with a third party and RE100 clients leading such transition, making financing maybe slightly different than what faces the utility. I mean, a lot of lenders will face at some point in time single borrower limit or exposure to certain off-takers if all renewable energy projects have just one off-taker. So that's something for the markets to think about. Land, again, a common theme in Asia where land acquisition is a challenge. it's either very lengthy or it's very expensive. Are there ways to solve this problem? Are there ways where government could potentially provide land parcels for development of project? Can that be done? So globally, we know certain geographies do that. Government, when they auction out renewable energy project, they also provide land parcels to go through this issue. And it has worked in some markets. Can that be done in Southeast Asia is a question, right? And then financing and bankability. Definitely, we need to have more bankable projects. If we have a very well reflective supporting framework of regulations, policy, implementation, etc., financing and bankability will more and more fall in place. For example, Vietnam, I've talked about earlier, and it's always the top of mind recall when we talk about such challenges in Southeast Asia, how non-recourse financing was a challenge in Vietnam, but some entities like Guarantor, etc., by enabling domestic financing have made it possible. We can still do with USD financing. I mean, and some markets do not need USD financing, for example, where PPAs are denominated in local currency. And they have very well developed domestic markets, for example, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, very competitive domestic banks. Probably we do not need that, but some markets do require USD financing. Vietnam, it became a problem because of the nature of projects, etc. But so far has not become a problem in Indonesia, only because of very few number of projects. It is to be seen as number of projects in Indonesia increase, will USD financing also become a problem for Indonesia? So it's something to be seen. I think these are the main reasons that tie the region up as one in terms of what are the common challenges facing the region in terms of deployment of clean energy and barriers to financing. Now, there are, of course, certain nuances to each market. What might make certain elements difficult than others? For example, Philippines, it could be merchant power projects, so which is not applicable to other markets in Southeast Asia, the ones that we're especially talking about. So can we do certain products that can elongate the tenor of projects that sell in BESM? And likewise, other markets have their own nuances, which kind of give it a little bit of friction in terms of tapping on that financing. So I'll stop here and then look forward to discussing more on the subject during the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonal. And those are very interesting points. Let's discuss more during the Q&A. Now let's move on to Lawrence. Lawrence is a leader at Climate Smart Ventures, CSV. He is a seasoned ESG advisor and energy transition expert who brings over 15 years of experience at the nexus of finance and Asia's energy transition. Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Lawrence Ang. I'm managing partner of Climate Smart Ventures, and thank you very much to ISR for inviting us to talk a bit about typical financing approaches, but as well as innovative financing approaches for renewable energy relevant to the ASEAN market. Okay, so I believe we're just trying to sort out the screen. Okay, great. Right, so let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, yeah, I think it's fixed now. Thank you very much. So again, happy to be here to run through kind of the topic of financing for renewable energy. Ideally, this should have come before Sonal's presentation, but unfortunately, I just slipped out of another event. And again, very happy to come in and sandwich the presentation, the inputs from Adam and Sonal on kind of where current financing approaches for RE stands for the ASEAN market. So let me run through first the normal or traditional financing instruments available for renewable energy. As many of us know, RE tends to be financed through project financing. Typically, this is the preference for the region. So developers, corporates who have pipelines of projects would go out and raise debt and equity for these projects, and this is what we call project financing. Typically, the debt to equity ratio would fall somewhere between 70-30 to debt to equity, or 80-20, depending on the credibility and as well as the profitability of the project, as well as the reputation of the developer. Loan tenors typically go from 7 to 12 years, and interest rates usually go from certain amounts of spread on top of benchmarks, whatever is being used in the country, so on and so forth. So again, the modality that has permeated largely in Southeast Asia and in the ASEAN level is kind of raising funding and financing from debt and equity providers who are interested in expanding renewables in emerging markets like the ASEAN. Now, while this has tended to be the normal approach to financing RE, there are other approaches that are emerging in the market as well. Among them is what we call corporate finance or traditional debt financing, where upon reaching certain levels, a notable brand or developer can come in and source debt at the holdco level as opposed to the project level, and they would then use those resources to be deployed against renewable energy projects that they have in the pipeline. So in this case, this would be seen more as corporate financing than project financing. The third kind of financing that is also becoming available is what we're calling mezzanine financing, where in some cases this is a space where impact investors also would like to participate, where they're seeing promising projects that come out of new kids on the block, new developers who may not necessarily have track records, and they extend debt or equity or debt that could be converted to equity over time upon reaching certain milestones in project development. Typically, because these kinds of engagements are higher risk, they tend to command a higher interest rate compared to senior debt or traditional debt. Also, because these tend to be uncollateralized or come in as uncollateralized, because senior debt has already swallowed up the collateral from the senior debt. This is your vanilla kind of financing that is kind of the norm in how RE projects are typically financed in the region. Well, obviously, traditional, as we've learned now through the last 2 decades, traditional financing has its challenges, right? So at the project financing level, you know, there's at some point there will be certain limits as to how much renewable energy projects, particularly smaller ones, can access, right? Particularly if they have limited volumes, like sub 100 megawatt or sub 50 megawatt type projects. This would have challenges securing project financing from mainstream banks who are incentivized to deploy larger amounts to trusted brands, right? Trusted developers with huge pipelines. They would be subjected to your normal FX risk, right? Banks, as I said, would be more risk averse in funding new and innovative technologies, particularly if these are coming from developers who have limited track record. But overall, they like investing in projects that have a track record of delivering their expected IRR. Anything below that IRR is a question mark for them. So new technologies, new players, again, these are challenging areas for normal project financiers. On the traditional debt side, again, even if you're a big player, you will at some point hit single borrowers limits when you're already borrowing from all the banks, right? Also, collateral requirements would need to be fulfilled. So again, this might be a problem for those seeking for corporate finances. They might have reached the amount of assets they can collateralize. And also on mezzanine financing, even though this might be more available from some of the newer funds looking to participate in this space, interest rates can be quite challenging for those borrowing. There are limited availability here, and also there's an extra layer of structuring and documentation needed to kind of give assurances to these lenders that you're going to meet their requirements for an uncollateralized loan or a convertible debt, so on and so forth. And this is where innovative financing shines, right? Because I think at some point, as Sunal mentioned, there is money floating around, but it's a question of how is this money that is floating around in the space fit for purpose to the new challenges, to the new economic, technological, political environment facing the energy industry across the ASEAN, right? And I think this is where innovative finance comes in, because it then seeks to de-risk new technologies, seeks to streamline some of those challenges that are being experienced through traditional financing. And again, pump prime, as they say, new modalities of getting more renewables built on the ground, whether it's through new business models or new technologies. This is where innovative finance could shine. And let me run through some examples of those. So again, as some of us in the room may have already heard, in terms of innovative finance, and it's not so innovative or new anymore, there's your typical green bonds. Again, green bonds are quite interesting because they're issuances that have a very specific use of proceeds, and is trying to communicate to the market that the issuer is ready to deploy certain amounts of financing towards very specific renewable energy projects at scale. So there's green bonds, again, different from your normal project financing, because then it kind of communicates that there's a pipe, right, of projects that is available for deployment. There's transition bonds, although this hasn't really taken, this hasn't really grown significantly or as fast as people would hope, but this is really more attached towards issuances that would look to transition processes with very specific use of proceeds around supply chain transformation or technology transformation. But what has been gaining ground as well on top of green bonds is the sustainability linked issuances or instruments, among them SLBs and SLLs, as you see on the screen. SLBs are interesting because they're a bit like green bonds, but as opposed to having a very specific use of proceeds on how the financing will be deployed, they could be used for general corporate purposes, which is attractive for the issuer, but the issuer would commit to certain KPIs or sustainable performance targets over the period of the bond or the maturity of the bond. And this could be something to do with how they address their emissions, how they address certain impact criteria on other things, or on access to power, so on and so forth. Whereas it's not necessarily attached to financial return. But obviously, they'd still expect financial return, but the key feature of an SLB would be focused on certain KPIs that you would have to achieve while making the returns possible through the bond, right? The other bit of this is the private version. So obviously, green bonds, SLBs are public issuances. The private version of this are loan facilities that are sustainably linked as well. So again, very similar to an SLB, but private. So a set of private lenders could come in, extend loans to potential borrowers with a commitment that the borrowers would hit out certain KPIs related to their operations that are usually sustainability or impact oriented. This is really interesting because, again, from a benefits perspective, we're now seeing an emerging segment in the financial markets that are interested in deploying capital towards impact, but in a way that doesn't necessarily recreate the wheel. They're trying to attach it to normal loan facilities, but have that extra kick on sustainable impact, or purchase or subscribe to bonds, but again have that kick that them subscribing to a bond is affecting certain sustainable impact transition goals, right? But by doing so, they're extending normal capital, right? So this is pretty much just normal capital with that extra feature of having to meet certain KPIs. These would usually have a feature that they are expecting lower returns, though not always. Like SLBs, some would argue that there's a certain greenium there because of the demand, say from European Western investors for sustainability linked bonds or issuances, that they would allow for lower return, provided that the criteria is met on the impact, right? So again, this provides an opportunity to blend down the cost of capital, which could have been high if you just went for a normal bank, right? And also overall, it allows you to kind of be flexible, right? SLBs, SLLs allow you to use it for general corporate purposes to grow the business, but through the process, you would need to show that you're meeting these KPIs, right? Obviously, the challenge is still there. There's extra disclosures needed, transparency, so on and so forth. Taxonomies are also being built up to use these frameworks and types of issuances for energy transition, coal managed phase out, so on and so forth. And again, at some point, it's not necessarily that mainstream that every institutional investor is going to jump at this opportunity. So far it's a growing segment, but there is also still a limit as to how much, you know, the capital markets can participate in these kinds of deals while still offering you that economic benefit to a potential issuer, right? So again, just some challenges to consider, but again, quite important to see because these are becoming quite mainstream now. Quick example here, 2 examples. A green bond issuance, I think made a couple of years back, where as part of a green bond issued by Star Energy, 2 tranches. First tranche was raised for $320 million. Coupon rate is 3.25. This would have a tenor of up to 2029. And the use of proceeds would be very specific to developing these 2 geothermal facilities, right? They issued the second tranche, which have a longer tenor of 18 years, expiring in 2038, maturing in 2038. And again, for this, it would have the very specific purpose of funding projects and repaying existing loans. On the right side, we have a sustainable linked bond issuance, which again, as opposed to a green bond issuance, this would go directly into funding general corporate purposes, but they would have very specific performance targets that they would need to hit out over the course of the bond's life, right? So in this case, Indorama Ventures or IVL would look to reduce their emissions by 10% by 2025 compared to 2020 base year. They'll need to kind of increase their recycling, the intensity of their recycling of their PET production, and source 25% of their renewable electricity by 2030 to 25%. Right now, in the event, I think what's an interesting feature in these SLBs as well is that in the event that they don't meet these goals, they would be required to buy, at least in this case, offsets, or there would be an increase in the rate. Right, there will be a step up in the rate to the point that it won't be competitive. They would just need to pay normal debt rates, right? Or bond rates that would not be this low anymore if they did not meet those goals. So again, different trade-offs if you're going for an SLB as opposed to a normal green bond. There's been a question asked around where does blended finance come in. So blended finance is where on top of your traditional debt and equity players who would come and support a project, concessional funders, whether it be it because they want to prime or de-risk this technology to increase replicability or scalability or attractiveness for the market as a whole, they will come in and provide concessional capital to get that project going. So in this case, for the Sarula geothermal project, ADB and JBIC had come in through their clean technology funds, their export-import kind of features that provide risk guarantees, so on and so forth, that they would then extend to the commercial lenders to overall lower the cost of debt for the project. That would then make the project more viable to then ensure that the project actually gets implemented, right? And happens in real time, as opposed to kind of folks arguing over the hurdle rates or whether this project will be viable. So in this case, blended finance comes in not only to blend the source of capital, but it also blend down the cost of capital for the project owners to then consider this as viable to be built, right? So again, this is another feature of innovative finance that can be leveraged. But again, the challenge here is there are limits to blended finance. Not all topics can be covered as blended finance. You'd be hard pressed to find any renewable energy project today that could be subject, any normal vanilla renewable energy project like wind, solar, geothermal, that could be eligible for blended finance, because a lot of these multilaterals or bilaterals would argue that that's already commercial. But where I think blended finance could really shine are those deals that are proving out new technologies. So this could be offshore wind, incorporating batteries into RE portfolios, or let's say wave technology, tidal power, bundling renewables with coal managed phase out. These are places where blended finance could have a very specific role in proving out that the transaction can be made viable and hence replicable by the future market, right? So I think this is where blended finance is still relevant today in RE. Again, lastly, last 2 slides. Again, just to be mindful that there are still a number of renewable energy funds out there that is looking to aggregate both limited partners or different investors into a fund and through an SPV invest in different projects, right? And they would operate it as a portfolio of different projects. So these are other kind of players in the ecosystem to be mindful of. On the other side, there is an increasing kind of a trend to issue project level bonds as well. Yep.
Your time
Go
is
ahead.
up. Sorry, Lawrence, your time is up.
Okay. All right. So that's it. Ultimately, this is my last slide, just to kind of highlight the different kind of financing approaches into the space. And yeah, happy to participate in the panel and share more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lawrence. That was very insightful. Hopefully we can explore more during Q&A. But before that, let's move on to Mas Jihan from Yayasan Rumah Energi. This is an Indonesian NGO focusing on sustainable development and community empowerment. So Mas Jihan is a team leader for a water security and conservation project for the Kalimalang Water Canal, Jakarta and outside Jakarta. Mas Jihan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for everyone and thank you ISR for inviting YRE to speak in this moment. So I think in complement with other speakers, which mostly talks in macroscopic scale of renewable energy financing, we would like to share here on the microscopic scale. So we would like to share how the IDBP or Indonesia Domestic Biogas Program having our journey in financing the renewable energy project at the community level. Next, please. Okay, so the IDBP is the goal in this project is to stimulate the grassroots communities in accessing domestic biogas. So, the domestic biogas proposed in contrast to the previous speakers, which mostly talks in utility purpose, this is for domestic energy consumption. And what we do is we are stimulating market approach and circular economy model. From 2009, when the project started, there are nearly 30,000 or estimately nearly 29,000 digesters built across 19 provinces in Indonesia. And in relation to the economic impact, it's based on our annual user survey. It's actually helping the beneficiaries, the household, to save around 65,000 per month. Well, maybe the number is not significant and would provide also additional income for the household from selling the biogas residue or the so-called bioslurry as much as 400,000 per month. And in terms of the climate impact, every unit of the biogas that we have built on average can help to reduce 3.3 tons of CO2 per year. And since the beginning of this program is registered in the gold standard voluntary carbon market, we have been reducing emission of greenhouse gas nearly 460,000 tons of CO2 cumulatively. Next, please. Okay, so in Indonesia, we have built across 19 different provinces, but what's most important that relevant to our discussion today is the provinces of West Java, East Java, and West Nusa Tenggara, because these three provinces are one of the three of the highest provinces with digesters built, and we involve cooperatives as part of financing partners to finance the biogas construction, because we try to put a blended financing in our construction and financing of the renewable energy program. Next, please. Okay, so how this is the ecosystem that Rumah Energi or YRE employ in implementing the IDBP. So because our goal is actually to stimulate the market approach, we try to reach out to the relevant stakeholders from the central and local government through the policy advocacy. We also approach the microfinance institutions to provide accompaniment and also to to push them and to convince them to provide renewable energy financing, especially on biogas loan, in addition to the subsidy that Rumah Energy gives from the carbon finance. And then we also provide accompaniment to construction partner organizations, which are mostly comes from small and medium enterprises, from local SMEs in each provinces or each areas. And we also establish a company called Biru Carbon Nusantara as part of, so we are actually a shareholder in this new company, which will handle all the carbon crediting mechanism and carbon trading. And in addition to these 4 entities, we also part of shareholder to the very right part of our slide, another company called Pupuk Sumber Negeri. So Rumah Energy is basically having 2 companies right now, the Biru Carbon Nusantara and Pupuk Sumber Negeri as a shareholder, where these companies are our strategy to stimulate the market approach, and we are trying to create a fully circular economy for the benefit of the biogas construction and used by our customers. So in cooperation with the governments and other donors or CSRs and other financing source, we usually put the financing from the government mixed in combination with the subsidy from the YRE, and to finance the material costs. And to the construction partner organizations, our responsibility is to do the quality control and research and development for the biogas construction. And then we also monitor the CPOs to make sure that they do their mandatory role to have to conduct the after sales services and trainings, because it is part of our way to ensure the sustainability of the constructed biogas. And just recently, for the past 2 years, with Pupuk Sumber Negeri, we set up an agreement with local cooperatives, where usually these cooperatives also our CPOs, are also our construction partner organization, but some it's not. So the agreement is that for the cooperatives to collect the bioslurry or the residue from the biogas, which collected by the farmers, and then the bioslurry would be sold to the Pupuk Sumber Negeri as off-taker of the bioslurry. And then the Pupuk Sumber Negeri would sell the bioslurry to agents and distributors, to agri-tech companies and farmers. So this is the ecosystem that we try to put so that the users and beneficiaries of the biogas program can fully benefit from the biogas that they construct. Okay, next. And talking about the blended financing that we have been doing for the past 10 years or more, as you can see here, it's actually kind of mixed. At the beginning, we have between 2009 until 2016, especially until 2013, we have many digesters built on loan, and we provide subsidy for the construction is around $130 per unit of the digesters built, and only a small portion at the time is paid in cash. And as time goes on and we establish cooperation with the governments, where the governments usually have a grant scheme for the local farmers. So that's where the co-funding and 100% grant starts to grow. And as you can see in the graph, that in 2019 and 2020, it's getting slower due to the COVID-19 impacts. But also in this period, we developed a new type of digesters, which is based on polyethylene with a smaller size and more affordable prices. And we start to see that this new digester model can actually increase the interest of farmers to invest in biogas. And talking about the source of the subsidy that YRE provided to all our beneficiaries, it is actually mixed between several sources. In the beginning, it's mostly from our donors, until 2013, where the IDBP started to enter the voluntary carbon market. It started to mix with the carbon financing, and then by 2021, we have stopped the major donors to financing our program, and then we now is mainly relies on the carbon fund to provide our subsidy and operating the whole programs. Next, please. Okay, so this is the growth of the biogas, and we saw that in the below pie chart. In 2021 and 2022, we actually see a positive growth by the introduction of a new smaller scale of biogas and with cheaper prices, that 75% is actually self-financed. So it's not relying on grant anymore, despite we are still providing subsidy. But the interesting point is from our annual user survey that the effectiveness of the subsidy is actually high when we provide the subsidy less than 3% of the total construction cost. We saw that 85% of the digesters built with less than 30% subsidy is operational, while when the subsidies higher than 30% is only 61% operational, while the non-operational digesters, I think it's pretty common issues with biogas program. It's mostly on non-technical issues, and such as the unavailability of the kettles or the laziness of the users, etc. And next. So the challenges and barriers is actually especially for the biogas model, is that the construction is higher, getting higher and higher. At least by the BPS, it mentioned that it's increasing by 6.87% year on year. In addition to that, the farmers also, actually their income is seasonal, both for cattle farmers or dairy farmers. And from the microfinance institutions themselves, especially the cooperatives, we found that most of them are lack of knowledge on the climate change issues, the importance of energy transition, green financing, and the technical aspects of the renewable energy that they can adopt. In addition to that, the available policy from the government is actually still not comprehensive. They are mostly still targeting the utility scale of renewable energy programs or EV, and there are not yet any regulation that can be adopted down to the microfinance institution, such as providing tax incentive from providing green financing. Next. But the opportunity is that with the correct model, we found that renewable energy is actually interesting for the microfinance institution partners and also to the customers themselves. And at least based on our communication and discussion with the cooperatives, that their interest to invest and funding and financing renewable energy projects, at least in small scale, is actually increasing annually. And the cooperative scheme as a microfinancing institution partner is actually potential because they have strong ties with the members, where usually they have like a minimum amount of saving in the cooperative before they can take a specific loan for the renewable energy or for the biogas that they want to construct. So this can actually reduce the potential of default risk. And finally, the increasing of global trends to green financing can actually be tapped to to help and assist the cooperatives and other microfinancing institution partners. Last, please. Okay, so in our experience, we found that most of these elements are still not connected, at least in the Indonesian context. And not every provinces also have healthy cooperatives, but when we can identify the potential cooperatives on that part, we can actually help them to at least to connect with the existing ecosystem, with the other lending partners, such as the Rabobank foundations or other green financing instruments in the green financing. And I think mainstreaming the issues and urgency of climate change and energy transition is also parts of an important things to do, at least in the micro scale, because it will help us to finance and fund the renewable energy projects at grassroots level, and to incentivize the innovation and business model that they can create, and also to establish the comprehensive policy with incentives and de-risking measures to be given to the cooperative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mas Jihan. That's really interesting. So we're entering the Q&A session now. We have around 35 minutes for the Q&A. I see now that some questions already come in the chat room. Let's start with Maria from Trihita. How can local banks and financial institutions play a more active role in financing green projects? Are there any initiatives or partnerships in place to promote such involvement? Perhaps we can start with Mas Adam.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in the end, the local banks are going to be like need to play a role as important as any financial institutions that are working on supporting the energy transitions. I mean, like the trend to the future is, I think it's very crystal clear. Yeah, I mean, energy transitions needs to happen, and then to one of the key important things to make this happen is the financing for the energy transitions. Like, if we are talking about IRENA, I mean, we have also this ETAF, Energy Transition Acceleration Financing Platform, in which we work with the financial institutions and matchmaking them with several renewable energy projects that we can help them. Remember, Sona also mentioned about this. One of the problem why the renewable energy projects are not as many renewable energy projects can get the financing is because the project is not up to the international level. This is what the thing that that ARENA is trying to help with this ETAP, Energy Transition Acceleration Financing Platform, that we can help this renewable energy project owners to set up their project into the international level of getting the fundings for the projects. And yeah, who knows, like in the future, this can be replicated or even into the more more detailed country level. Yeah, I mean, where the local banks also work, use how the ETAF is the concept of ETAF can be replicated in the country level for the financing as well. Yeah, something like that.
Okay, thank you, Mas Jihan. Sorry, Mas Adam. So let's go to the next question. This is from Mas Ilham Surya, and the questions are for Sonal and Lawrence. So it is rational that lenders or banks or investors want to make money when investing in energy transition. So it makes sense that they seem to be interested in investing on renewable energy installation projects, but neglects fossil fuel phase out investment. Is there any way to make fossil fuel phase out look more attractive to investors because they are equally important? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I can take that one. So yeah, it's right to say that, the lenders or financial institutions are answerable to their shareholders where they have to make returns. So they have a duty to deliver those returns. They can do that by investing in renewable energy. Thankfully now with, a good business model and good returns that are being promised by renewable energy project. But yes, equally important is to take the coal out of system, especially where we have an overbuilt of capacity, while keeping in mind the reliability of the system, availability, and the primary objective of providing electricity as well. So trying to balance all of that. Now, how can banks and other financial institutions participate in coal phase out? So a structure in Philippines was implemented by ADB, where ADB managed to get some banks to refinance that coal phase out. You need certain kind of financial institutions who are more impact focused or can have a lower cost of capital, which can probably replace, some of the capital requirements, etc. So more robust structure is required for banks to be able to play a role in that, at end of the day, the nature of capital will determine who invests in certain projects, right? For example, we have impact funds, which are either, the investors are governments or they are philanthropies, etc., who are more inclined on first loss or, having a lower cost of capital because the primary purpose is to make impact. Those kind of capital sources might be more suitable for this kind of, structure than really banks. But yes, if there is, a lower return promised, I would not say it will be as attractive as, investing in another project. Yes, the banks could, potentially participate.
Okay, thank you so much, Sona. We have, so it seems like Lawrence is still not with us. So let's go to the third question from Teguh Arwansyah. This is
Hi everyone, this is Lawrence. I managed to connect back. Sorry about that. You'd think Singapore would have better connection. I apologize. Yeah, so no, I think just to respond to the previous query, we don't, before we go into innovative financing, I think the first principle question is we need RE projects to fund, right? That's the first one. I think for the context of and Indonesia, it's always important to start with finding the projects, the RE projects, and the right developers who would put their foot forward to actually develop those projects. And then we can figure out the right financing for that. So I think enabling more RE projects to be developed and established in an Indonesian policy context is quite critical. That's kind of my first point. And then we can then figure out based on the macro and microeconomics of that particular subject, that project is part of, then we can figure out the right financing approach, right? So I think that's kind of the first comment I'd like to make. I think secondly, that somebody had asked a question around how do we look at fossil fuel, but looking at managed phase out of fossil fuel, how do you tie that with renewables? Absolutely. I think on top of this principal issue around making sure there's a pipeline of RE projects, one way to make the managed phase out of coal attractive to potential investors is if we bundle the value destruction that is implicit in early coal retirement. So again, there will be some value lost if we're looking to retire coal plants earlier than end of life, right? Their technical or economic end of life. So you will lose some value there. So technically, investors would need to be incentivized elsewhere. And one way to do that is to offer a value creation opportunity through renewables investment, right? So those tie in together very well. I mean, bundling the value creation on the RE to offset the value destruction on the early coal retirement into one transaction, net potentially create a positive economic benefit to potential investors or even the original coal plant owner if they participate in the RE project. So I think thinking through how we unlock renewables as a standalone, but also to accelerate the viability of coal phase out is quite important for an Indonesian context. So I just want to add that, because I think outside Indonesia, this is pretty much an important feature of any ETM deal that involves kind of private investors. There has to be an opportunity to create new value outside the coal piece for them to agree to participate in the early retirement of the coal, and that typically comes through renewables, right? So I think I just want to make that point to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. So there's a third question from Teguh Anwarsha. This is also for Sonal and Lawrence. So how do you see the dynamic of the foreign banks and lenders side in financing renewable energy projects in Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines? How competitive are they in comparison with local commercial banks? As you said, some countries tend to use local currencies than the US dollar. Thank you.
I'm happy to go first, and probably Lawrence can add. So basically, the nature of the currency of financing will depend on how your PPA is. If it is local currency but indexed to US dollar, probably you can borrow in US dollar. What is your view on currency depreciation and appreciation will determine what kind of currency you borrow in. Also determines what your initial costs are, which currency are you incurring the costs in. So for example, markets like Thailand, Philippines, the PPA is local currency, so it's in baht and peso. It's not indexed to US dollar. You will, if you borrow in US dollar, you will need to, take hedging products to ensure that you are not exposed to Forex risk. And that might become expensive. Now, if you look at the domestic financing landscape in Thailand and Philippines, they're extremely competitive, right? Now, for some players, for example, in Philippines, when Philippines has announced 100% foreign ownership, maybe some players, international players, might bring their banking relationships and get, financing in US dollar as long as the hedging costs make sense. So we might see that happen. But for now, most of the financings are led by domestic banks and it's extremely competitive. Indonesia and Vietnam, the PPAs are local currency, paid in local currency, but indexed to US dollar with a true-up mechanism. In that case, you can borrow in US dollar. In Vietnam, projects have borrowed in US dollar. Projects have also borrowed in domestic currency, dong. And in Indonesia, with the fewer projects that we have seen, projects have borrowed in US dollars. For example, the floating solar, for example, the current wind project that's under financing, mostly US dollar financing has been explored for such projects because your underlying PPA true-ups the exchange. Lawrence, would you like to add anything?
No, I think just to quickly say that I agree 100%. I mean, the key component to what Sonal mentioned is the assumption of a PPA, right, for an RE project. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that for any of this issuances, denomination investments to actually be interested in the market, it assumes that there is a PPA that could be awarded to an RE project. Right. And I think, I think there's a big tender for de-dieselization right now in Indonesia that a lot of folks are looking at. So that could be interesting from an RE perspective. But outside that, again, I think we're yet to see the sizable renewable energy projects materialize for which PPAs could be awarded, for which this type of discussion could be made relevant too. So I just want to kind of right size the discussion to the reality of the RE pipe in Indonesia.
Yeah, and another point to be considered would be, so for example, market like Philippines, we might not get as long tenor from the domestic banks as we would desire for RE projects and of certain types. So for example, with merchant risk, etc. So in that case, probably USD financing can play a role. So if the deposit period for, domestic banks is shorter, their lending period will be shorter. And in such cases, USD financing can come in and provide an extension of tenor, things like that. So those are the opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Sonal and Lawrence. While waiting for more questions from the audience, I have a question for Mas Jihan. What do you think these small-scale renewable energy projects actually have a lot of potentials if only it can be scaled up? So what do you think can be done to scale up the projects to give more significant impacts on reducing carbon emissions?
So the challenges that we found that, as I mentioned, is that lack of awareness from the cooperative partners that are, I think, also becomes the forefront to finance the renewable energy projects to scale up in Indonesia in general. Because in terms of financing renewable energy projects in Indonesia, we need to involve these cooperatives. And in addition to the bank who provide the microfinance loans, and the challenges also from us is because at least in the domestic biogas context is the biogas is constructed. The biogas model needs a skilled workers to work and construct the biogas. And that's why we still limited to 19 provinces despite the more than 10 years experience in Indonesia. And that's why we are also considering to expand to and adopting other biogas models. But it's still on a lot of considerations, especially with the availability of the partners and especially from the cooperatives and banks to provide a supporting ecosystem in this context. And in addition to that, because our renewable energy is heavily dependent on cattle's availability, and in Indonesian context, that there are various technical challenges from the farmers. For example, they don't really have the proper cattle setting, and the availability of the cattle is seasonal. That is also another challenge why we cannot scale up yet. And it really dependent on the context of the provincial that we want to intervene. And it's actually very costly for us to invest to put other new staff or technical staff in the provinces. So we haven't really found we need to customize the model that I mentioned in my slide. That this model is it the model that we use in East Java, for example, where we cooperate with cooperatives with dairy farmers to finance the biogas financing is adoptable in West Sumatra, for example. So it's really contextual where we do. Thank you. I hope that explains. Answer your question.
Okay, thank you, Mas Jihan. I have a question for Mas Adam. So subdeveloped nations last year announced JETP, which was mentioned by Sonal just earlier. For Indonesia, like around $20 billion, and then for Vietnam, around $50 billion. But we, to date, we haven't heard like the actual disbursement. So what do you think is like the challenges of this disbursement of the JETP financing? So what can be done to accelerate it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marawinda. Yeah, I mean, I was involved also in these discussions several months back with regards to this. I mean, like there's the main reasons that become the first things needed to be solved is that to find appropriate, the suitable financial schemes that works on, especially with regards to dispersing these JETPs on to finance this coal phase out, is still become the main challenge. Like the they are still cooking up all together the working group. This is what I understood until now, that to find the correct or the most suitable that that can accommodate everyone's benefit in triggering up this funding to be dispersed towards the implementation of the JETP, especially on coal phase out, is something that they are still haven't agreed upon. Yeah, even in Vietnam, I understood from the discussion with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet that we had earlier this year, that even within the stakeholders among them, they are still not in one voice with regards to accepting this JETP or not. This is also the things that become the main hurdles of the implementation of JETPs in the countries. I mean, like when we're talking about the ASEAN regions in general, I mean, every countries, every member states are unique with regards to the renewable energy resources that are diverse from one countries to the others. They have also different policies that is being implemented within the countries, even the political views, right? And this becomes this among several challenges that maybe still become the hurdles of the energy transition within the regions. But we are talking about opportunities here as well, that despite all of the difficulties, despite all of the the voice that has not been united within the stakeholders in the countries, many countries in ASEAN regions still pledging out the net zero. This is good start. I mean, we still need to appreciate this. And also, despite all of these difficulties that happens within the country, Vietnam has succeeded to set up the world record of renewable energy deployment. What we need to do, in my opinion, is like let's focus on what works. I mean, see Vietnam, how they are able to implement and increase their renewable energy deployment in the countries despite all of the difficulties, and what can still be and learn what from what can still be improved in the implementation, and let's replicate them. And also Lawrence mentioned about how the investment in Indonesia with regards to this star energy geothermal and Indorama that works. Yeah, I mean, like each of the countries, each of our member states needs to have the open arm to learn from each other, right? See what works, and then see what are the things that are still needed to be improved, and yeah, continue the discussions among the countries. I mean, we are talking about the reaching net zero for the region, so we need to work together on that, and this is a good opportunity, I think.
Okay, thank you, Mas Adam. We have two questions from Jack Chen from IFU. A Danish DFI actively eyeing investment opportunities in renewable energy in Southeast Asia. His questions are, first, given strong competition on debt financing by local banks, where do you see the potential for equity investment by foreign investors? Perhaps Sonal and Lawrence can answer the questions.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, one, are we talking about debt or are we talking about equity? So if you're talking about debt and a DFI providing debt, there are ample opportunities in terms of making the commercials better for projects. So for example, either offering extended tenor or offering some kind of guarantee products or concessional capital, etc. So there's always an opportunity. Then depending on the scale of the project, so maybe utility scale is heavily dominated and there's a need for financing, and as a DFI, you could, potentially look at smaller scale projects, so maybe rooftop solar projects, etc. On looking at equity side, again, there are ample opportunities on the kind of equity capital. So earlier, Lawrence was talking about mezzanine capital. So maybe projects that do not get to, tap on project financing due to various reasons. There is a requirement of, a structured product at mezzanine level, which could be quasi-equity, depending on the risk profile of the project. So there are ample opportunities. I recently advised a DFI actually from a European country to look at Southeast Asia opportunities. Now, it also depends on, how big your ticket size is, what kind of risk profile do you want to take in terms of early stage or mid stage or operational projects. So the opportunities will depend on that.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say, kind of on top of what Siddal mentioned, on our side as well, we're looking at DFIs participating on the either on the equity at the holdco level, particularly for newer players who have promising track records or have promising pipeline and with some semblance of track record. And, I think there's certainly opportunities for DFIs to come in on the equity side for some of these developers, but at the holdco level instead of the project level. So I think there's a bit of that gamble, but I think ultimately with how fast this space is growing across the ASEAN, equity, particularly from DFIs, could be useful in that context in driving transformation from within, particularly from some of these newer players. And again at the project level, again that some kind of when DFIs can come in on the guarantee side or the first loss, certainly that would be helpful, but also potentially coming in with concessional kind of finance to lower the overall cost allows the project to reduce that pressure to kind of reduce pressure on kind of reduce pressure from operations and earn higher returns, again further demonstrating the new business model, new technologies that they're trying to push out there. So again, DFIs can play a very specific role in unlocking this kind of next generation investments in RE in the space. But maybe I'll come back to the earlier question around JETPs, and I think it's an important one because it kind of overshadows a lot of these conversations we're having, particularly for Indonesia. It's a hard problem, and I think Indonesia's taking the bold step forward and trying to address this as a whole of country approach, which is very laudable. But again, I agree to our previous colleagues' comment that it's learning by doing, right? Particularly for a market like Indonesia, we need to learn by doing. And I think the more we engage the industry, particularly let's say IPPs and other first movers are willing to put their name in the hat to kind of try out things, I think the more chances that we have in kind of getting it right over time. So that's kind of one point I just want to echo. The other point, I guess, is again, I think particularly for Indonesia, the challenge has been linking the JETP story back to renewables, right? I think there's a lot of focus on coal phase out, accelerating coal phase out, establishing a schedule for coal plants to be shut down by certain periods of time. But I think what needs more work is kind of linking this back to how renewables will be unlocked through the process, right? As part of this just transition. I think this is another area that's kind of worth looking at. Again, it's challenging, but I think the best way to go about this is kind of working with the first movers to get it done. And I think there are kind of certain movements around that, but also making sure that we frame this as part of a broader shift towards renewables. But I think our colleagues know that already, but it's just a matter of re-emphasizing again, probably.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence and Sonal. And this is the second question from Jack. So what is your view on prospects on microgrid and geothermal in Southeast Asia? Perhaps, Mas Adam, just to add a bit, like Indonesia's company Pertamina Geothermal Energy had an IPO this year, quite a big IPO, but its share performance is quite disappointing this year so far. So this reflects the challenge of geothermal potential in Indonesia. So what do you see the prospects of microgrid and geothermal? Mas Adam?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I touched upon the microgrid a little bit. So we had this just yesterday, the energy transition for the rural decarbonizing the rural area, right? And this has become a topic of interest of Indonesia as well. We talk also with the Ministry of the Rural and underdeveloped area in Indonesia, and that that they are working with several other ministries and every institutions on how to touch upon the electrification and decarbonizations all together, right? So when talking about the eastern part of Indonesia, I mean it is going to be very challenging for PLN to connect the grids there. So the microgrids and the utilizations of the local renewables are going to be the key for the 0.0x% of the unelectrified location in Indonesia. So this emphasize that the microgrids and the rural renewables are going to be very important in achieving the Indonesian energy transitions. With regards to the geothermal, when we are talking about the Indonesian energy transition outlook, we see that the geothermal role needs to be there. But again, I mean, when we are talking about the technicalities and investment, as well as some of the challenges on sites, this is the things that needs to be addressed by all of the stakeholders that works on this area, right? This is not something that rely upon one stakeholders and then they need to solve everything. But yeah, geothermal is a bit more complex on the implementations, and if we are talking about the investment, even from the very early stage of the development of geothermal, is already been really costly, right? So yeah, the more efforts towards the implementations of the reliable geothermal power system here in Indonesia. If you are talking about the power generation from the geothermal energy, needs to be given more efforts. But there is also something going on and this being discussed about the potential of the direct use of low temperature geothermal for example, agriculture and maybe fisheries that can be also be explored in Indonesia, decarbonization efforts, something like that.
Thank you, Mas Adam. A question related to. Okay. I think that was the last question. Our time is we already running out of time. So thank you so much for all the panelists and also all the participants who attend this webinar. So I'm handing back this over to the MC. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Erwida, and all the panelists, Mr. Adam, Ms. Sonal, Mr. Lawrence, and Mr. Jihan for the insightful discussion. As we are now approaching the closure of our event, I would like to note several important points of our event today. The first one is the discussion of ASEAN's energy demand growth and the investment needs. The second one is the barriers and the opportunities in financing renewable energy in the Southeast Asia region. Third, the role of innovative financing in addressing the challenges and barriers faced by traditional financing in renewable energy development. And the last one that needs to be considered even more is the importance of the correct model cooperation and the increasing interest and trends of renewable energy projects in succeeding the renewable energy project in Southeast Asia. Lastly, on behalf of the Institute for Essential Services Reform, I would like to say thank you very much and express our gratitude to everyone who joins today's webinar from Zoom. It has been our pleasure to host this webinar and acquire substantive insights about the potential of renewable energy finance in Southeast Asia. We truly hope that this event can be the next step and bring changes towards decarbonized ASEAN. Last but not least, I would like to apologize for any inconvenience or lack of words in carrying out this webinar. That's all from me. See you at the next opportunity. Thank you and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.